COVID-19 pandemic has affected educational systems globally, leading to the closures of education institutes, impacting almost half of the world's student population. The impact was more severe for disadvantaged children who did not have access to distance learning, causing interrupted learning and consequent economic costs to families. UNICEF and UNESCO are then urgently calling on Asia-Pacific governments and education partners to take immediate action to ensure that every learner reaches his or her full potential. Nobody should be left behind. The recent Second Asia-Pacific Regional Ministers Conference was served to address urgent needs for post-pandemic learning recovery for over 800 million children and comprehensive education transformation in the region.
This health crisis actually affected the education sector worldwide, as never happened before in history. There is still an important, relevant sense of urgency for prioritizing education unless we want a generational catastrophe. Each crisis also brings an opportunity. This is a region which has 60% of the world population. 800 million students in this region, South Asia, have been affected by the COVID-19 closure, which ranged from 8 to 35 weeks, which is a huge. The consequences of these school closures we can already measure concretely. UNESCO with partners since the beginning of the crisis taking the leadership about monitoring the impact. Learning poverty, which is the measure of proficiency in reading, a simple test for children, is supposed to increase from 50% to 70% globally. Let me mention one side of the coin, which is maybe the most interesting. It's about children not being yet able, unfortunately, to have access to the internet at home. And this is a population of learners who have been excluded by measures to contrast the COVID-19 impact. We know that in this region, only 13% of children can have access to the internet at home. And the consequences are not only in terms of the learning outcomes, but also very much affecting the real core of learning, which is about the socio-emotional reaction of children, the gap that this crisis actually creates in their own lives. And we don't know which will be the long-term consequence. We talk about a long COVID in terms of health, and there will be maybe a long COVID in terms of education. It brings me also to the role of and the mission of Equitable Education Fund here in the region. And in Thailand, you are dealing with inequalities, and this is exactly the mission of UNESCO since its establishment. It's actually addressing the commitment of the government and of the minister to really have an inclusive and quality education for all. This is the right time to continue in committing the country to have education as one of the social policies to be at the core of the political action plan. The competition between countries, as well the cooperation very much needed in this century, in the future will not be about commodities actually. Will be about talent, will be about brains, will be about young, brilliant minds who can contribute to the development of their own territories and communities.
With post-pandemic learning recovery plan intact, successful and innovative education initiatives and opportunities will give access learning for all children and youth, especially for the socio-economically disadvantaged, the disabled, and young girls dropped out of school. Crucially, teachers are at the heart of education renewal. The pandemic has more than ever highlighted their invaluable role. Therefore, teachers with professional support to collaborate and innovate will bring a strong influence on the futures of education all across the globe.